Greetings, brothers and sisters. Today's Tuesday, December 26th. I got a few separate voiceovers I want to put together. I did one already on the difference between a queen, a royal family, the royal family, and a spiritual master. And I did two, in terms of leadership and how something like that comes about, like a saint or a spiritual person versus a royal person, in terms of the way that we do leadership in a, whatever it is. And it's going to tie into what I'm saying here. And then I want to do a third, like voiceover about the Christmas, another Christmas thing, post Christmas thing. A little bit groggy today, this morning. I'm just waking up. But to start off with, I've talked about this a little bit, but never in this much depth, and it's kind of important in the idea of being a truther or somebody seeking the truth. And that is that, people tend to want to group up in their belief system and what they believe. They tend towards group think, right? In terms of their beliefs, in terms of the way they think about the world. So this is what they do with political parties, right? So if you're a liberal Democrat, you're for abortion, but you're against war. Like, for example, like there seems to be a disconnect there, right? Democrats have always been traditionally, I mean, not so much lately with Obama and Biden and this era, but liberals are more about human rights and like they're, uh, for example, the stuff with Gaza. They're on the side of the Palestinians, most of these liberals, and yet they're pro-choice and they're not pro-life when it comes to a fetus. So like you have these things that don't really sort of add up, right? Another example for liberals is the LGBTQ. These various letters that are there for people who have different, non-cisgender, what they call cisgender, heterosexual, sexual tendencies in one way or another. And the feminist as well, right? So, but what you have is, for let's say the L's, the lesbians in the LGBTQ, and feminists who would be more pro women, oftentimes lesbians are also feminists, are more pro, women, achievement of women, right? And then you would have something where biological males as transgenders would be competing in sports and winning women's sports and, women winning women of the year. I've talked about this in the past, right? And so it seems like these groups are, they're brought together in this, this group of, this word salad, right? This, these different letters, but it seems like the T's and the L's are in opposition, right? The transgender males who are biological males who are beating women in sports and who are, like let's say you had a transgender male who was the first woman president. So it seems like the T's and the L's and the feminists are not aligned in different, way that you would have these belief systems, right? We saw this with the woman who is the author of Harry Potter, who's a feminist, and she's sort of anti-T and has been, she's very liberal, but they've bound these letters together, these different, people. They're much different in their orientation to the world. They're sort of bonded together in this lobbying block that's, that's all a part of the liberal platform, right? And then you have people on the right who are like, say, very pro-life. They're pro-life people. And yet they're pro-war. They're, the biggest people for the military-industrial complex. They're pro-gun. They're pro all these things. And they're also anti, social services. So helping young women who are, who are single moms. They're anti-welfare. They're anti-food stamp, these kind of things, right? And so they don't want to give any assistance to these women who are, who are struggling financially because they didn't get an abortion. So you have these things, right? But what I'm saying here is when people are aligned with a group, and this is a larger group of liberals and, conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, they tend to find out what the other people in that group think, and they all think the same thing. they all agree with those positions, right? You have this in small groups of people, in cliques, and I've talked about Stockholm syndrome and these things, the Stanford experiment, these other experiments. I showed an experiment which I had to edit out of a video because it had music in the background. But it was an experiment where this one guy, there was 5 people, 5 like young men who are there was only one of them was being part of the experiment. The other ones were all shills. And they were presented lines like, they were presented one line and then 3 lines that one of them matched and 2 of them didn't. Like the thing like Sesame Street, one of the things isn't like the other kind of thing. And one was clearly the obvious line that matched or shape that matched. But the other 4 people would pick the wrong line or shape or whatever it was. And the one person who was the subject of the experiment would eventually start picking the wrong one just to belong with the other 4 people. And he was like the second to last to decide, or the last one, whatever, in terms of when they go through it. So people will tend to agree with the people that are around them in a social group or social setting, and will eventually come around. If they're pressured, it's hard for them to stand up and believe something different. And over the years, I saw that this happened in the truth community, where there would be these narratives that would sort of go around the truth community about how to think about what was going on, and then the alternative explanation to the official story. And they became embedded in truthers' minds and truthers' approach to these things. And I was a part of that in the beginning. We all kind of had these shared beliefs. One of them was like, there's the official story of the big event in 2001, and the majority of people believed that thermite was a part of that. But when I, started to make my own videos about it, I researched and found out that thermite isn't used in controlled demolition. And it isn't used when there is concrete around it would be hard to use. They don't use it in general. Like the company that has done the biggest buildings in terms of controlled demolition never uses thermite. In fact, it's not, it's only used in the case of like a structure that doesn't have any cement around it, and it's just the girders or the metal structure. Like something that they started to build and then something happened, they decide not to build it, and they take down the structure. It's only been used like twice, and that's not by the big companies. And so it's not really used, right? And there was kind of a shill guy that came out and proposed this as a solution, one of the early engineers that became a part of this thing, but he seems to be disinformation. And so he put the idea of thermite out there, but the girders in the structure are encased in cement. And you have to have direct contact with the metal for thermite to burn through it. And so they use charges. The way they do controlled demolition, they use charges, which, are a series of explosions, right? What I believe it happened was these mini nukes, and explains what we saw when these things came down, right? But that's, people disagree with that. There's other people who believe that it's some sort of energy weapon, but there's very little evidence that we have such weapons, and, that whatever. And that wouldn't do it the way it did it, where this thing sort of, if you look at the building, it's sort of vaporized from the bottom up, right? But you had these, these different, takes on these things, like these different, versions of what happened, because people didn't believe the official story. And then when I talked about thermite, and there'll be a few people here, they got really butthurt and upset because that's what they had come to believe. And they didn't want to listen to any evidence or anything that was different than that, right, for something that was so important, in terms of the, it's a big deal if it's a mini nuke, right, because that's a whole different thing. Another thing is overpopulation. So, what people in the truth community have done is, whatever the official story is, they believe the opposite. Whatever the government tells them, it's the opposite, right? And so they come up with these opposite narratives without sufficient evidence or critical thinking skills. And they watch a video that someone puts out, and the person is either we know that there's disinformation agents, lots of them, in the truth community. Lots of these, whatever it is. And we know that these deviant movements, the flat earth movement, the these like the QB movement, things that are also disinformation that are being put out to undermine the stuff here. Those are all these different theories and things that are out there that are there to create division and these other things. And you have these group things. You have these cliques of people, group people, and group together, and they war about this in the truth community. They go after each other about their beliefs, right? But there was this idea that everyone in the world could fit in the state of Texas and we're not overpopulated. But it's obvious, like the amount of resources that we're consuming as a species is unsustainable, and that overpopulation happens in small areas. Like when you have an overpopulation of insects like locusts, it doesn't happen globally. It happens in small areas in the world. Or whether it's an overpopulation of rats or any kind of species, it's in a local area. And that's what we have in cities. And so we're consuming too much, we're polluting too much, and we're making things go extinct. We're clearly overpopulated. There's more people now than there are people dead, right? And the Earth just can't have 8 billion people. If you go to these areas, if you've been to any of them, if you go to these cities, in India, even America, but like if you go to an Indian city where there's 40 million people or 20 million people, in China and some of these places, you see that there's overpopulation. But there's all these people who believe that that's just a part of the agenda, and it's very simplistic thinking. And they don't do research. They can't be told or talked to, in any way. You can't explain things to them because they just agree with what they think everyone else in their group agrees with. And there's this group think that comes with it, right? Generally what happens in the truth community is that the official story gets exposed as being not true. And, it's very obvious to people after a while. They can see the lies. People, even simplistic people can start recognizing the patterns. And they realize that they're being lied to by the news and the government and the intelligence community, these things. And when I first started doing truther things, this is how I approached it. There was the lie. And then I would watch a video from somebody or whatever it was, and there'd be an explanation. And if that explanation was sort of picked up by more and more people in the truth community, it became reality. It became what truthers believed. And if you confronted that explanation, most people don't do research. They say do your own research, but doing their own research, coming to listen to someone like me, listen to, to whoever kind of person's out here that's giving an alternative explanation, and just accepting what that person did, not doing or trying to fact check or seeing if what the person's saying is valid. When I first started doing videos, I'd do my own research. I would fact check the people, but sometimes the facts were not really facts. They were things that people presented in other videos, whatever it might be. And so I didn't, I went along more with the group mentality in the truth community. But then I started to see that there are things that were just false. And then when I said things about that they were just false. And when I looked into something, I would say, well, this is speculation. I didn't feel good about the videos I was making because like some of them were speculative and I was claiming them as facts because other people, I thought they had vetted it, right? I thought that they had done like real legitimate research. I found oftentimes they hadn't. And so, it was things that would be just passed around that people would put out there that no one had ever really looked into, or it was maybe even someone who was a disinformation agent. And I realized if I was going to make videos, I had to make a distinction between what was fact and what was speculation. Like sometimes the speculation was okay, but it wasn't. It was a good solid theory, but all it was a theory. It wasn't something that we knew for sure. Sometimes we were incapable of having the information, like something to do with, say, medical studies, like the research that was done. Like we didn't have the ability to do the research. We didn't have the ability to do the polling. We don't have we don't have polling data. We don't have scientific research. We can do biological research. And so we're not trained to interpret that type of research either. A lot of times we don't understand the terms, the terminology. And so we can't really decipher, someone like Fushi could get up there and just, BS us and we wouldn't know because we didn't have that training, right? And there's all these things out there. You can't be an expert in all of them. And so, I became lighter in what I presented because I knew there was a lot of disinformation. I knew there was a lot of lies going around. People would send me things all the time that weren't true, that were just out and out, just lies, but nobody knew it. And there'd be a meme or a little picture or something with some very like bumper sticker like expressions. And I realized that people were, just doing the same thing they did when they were sheeple. Now they were truther sheeple that were just, going along with what everyone else was saying or, what the majority was saying. It happened with the Cubies when you disagreed with their BS and their stupid things they believed, and they would call you a shill, or they called me a shill, or whatever it was, right? And it was because I disagreed with their lame reasoning power and their emotionally based stuff that was going around that was not factual in any way. And they would attack you because they were just that stupid and that like underdeveloped as, an intellect, and they had no capabilities of critical thinking skills. And so this is, what I'm talking about. That you have to figure out your own method to cut through the BS and make your decisions, because some things don't affect you. They're just opinions about what's going on in the world. But sometimes you have to make decisions about, what you're going to do and spend your time and energy, in terms of preparing for the future. And like whether you're going to take the bloop or not, right? You have to figure out a way to, make that decision. Like, is it something that's actually, good for me or not? And, it's not just listening to other people, but understanding the implications of something, right? Because it's, you're putting something in your body that could either prevent something that's malevolent or not, or it's malevolent itself, right? And people have to figure out, what to do about that decision. And there are a lot of people who just watched a video of somebody else describing it and they made their decision one way or another based in, somebody else's opinion and whether they trust those people, and they're clueless. Like they might have made the right decision, but they didn't do it for the right way. Like it's a person who came up with the right answer in math, but can't explain how they got to that right answer because they copied it off of somebody else's paper. They didn't know how to do it, so they get it correct on the test, but they don't know how to do that mathematical problem. And one of the things, because Alex Jones was this big shill and he had this thing called InfoWars, and so many people came through the truth community, especially initially years and years ago, through his, his shill, his disinformation, his, whatever it was, his channel and his program. And the information war, what he called information war, was about waking people up. And if you presented the information to them the way he presented it to them, to your family and friends, and they got the information you were getting, they would align with you. They would believe what you believed, and then everyone would know the truth, and they would take down the people in the so-called, well, I guess they're calling it deep state now. I don't know what Alex Jones refers to it as now, but he did for a while, the deep state. And the system could be saved, and there's a lot of fear and panic, Chicken Little, the sky's falling, Alex Jones, and in that mindset, these people, fear-based people, a lot of them sort of right-wing tendency people. And none of that's true because we all experienced it. So we would go into our relatives and friends and present some of the information, and it didn't change them. In fact, they ostracized us or became concerned with us because they had their group think and they had their group of people. And when you're in a social system, you're going to want to align your beliefs, because you're going to go to a dinner party and you're going to go to, which I don't know, I've never been to a dinner party. But you're going to be in a social circumstance with the people that are like you. And if you're a liberal and you're in Hollywood and you're like, those kind of people in a suburb, and you're going to want people to have similar points of view, and then once in a while somebody doesn't, and they, have ways of dealing with it. But they'll find some common ground of things that they can agree on, right, or whatever. But the way that things are now with the internet and everything getting more intense, it's really hard to be in any kind of a relationship with people who believe things that are different than you believe, because the beliefs are so divergent and they're like almost threatening. People having like almost threatening beliefs in terms of they're the enemy. They're the, evil. Like people who don't believe what you believe are evil, and they're part of the evil agenda. It's become like that because it's become a battle of good and evil. And so there's all of that, people wanting to group together. So it doesn't work. The whole information wars doesn't work. And then when you look into the numbers and you look into what our system's really about, and the religious aspect of it, and the materialism and all of it, you realize it can't be fixed. But so many people, their whole orientation to the truth community is about hope that the system can be fixed, and that that's all they're there for, is finding some way to isolate the evil to one group of people they call the deep state or whatever they call it, the controllers, or this group, whatever group that they're attributing the evil to. And if you got rid of these groups of people and you put in the good people that are like you in power, they could fix the system, and it's just, it can't be done. And if you look into it, that's your ultimate conclusion. So it's a waste of time. And that the system is just corrupt and demonic in its nature, its whole orientation. And so people don't want to hear that. They get upset, and it makes them, anxious or whatever, and they'll either leave my channel or they'll attack me or whatever. It's just because it's threatening to them that this reality could be a reality, like even a possibility. They can't even deal with that possibility. But in that, you have to develop a strategy to understand and differentiate between people and things that are being done and things that are being said, and a case-by-case basis, because sometimes you're on the wrong side of things just because the last time you were on the right side and it was there was a similar belief or similar circumstance. But you have to develop the capacity to be flexible and realize you don't know, like to realize the things that you're never going to know. There's a lot of unanswered questions you're going to have as you do this, because there's motivations for things, like why are they doing it? Like why are the people controlling the system doing it? Like there's missing information, like why are there chemtrails? Why are they doing chemtrails, for example? What's the reason for it? And you can come up with your own theory, but unless you find, classified documents which may or may not be forged, or somebody presents information or somebody comes up with a theory with some evidence, it's still not going to be all you need. Like you'd have to get in there and find out what the motivation is for that. Is there something going on that, they're not telling you, that they're trying to hide, or they're trying to prevent something or whatever? Or, is it about depopulation? So you have to know their motivation. What's the reason for this thing being done? And most of the times you'll never find out the reason. You might figure it out, but you won't have the facts to, you can do it like just intuitionally and get a sense of it. And you kind of be, still be speculation, but you'll kind of know. But I guess Jesus said something like, give to Caesar what's Caesar's. And that's what a lot of this is about. Like, give to Caesar what's Caesar's. We're involved in a system, and why it still exists. Take advantage of the good things in the system. Get the things you need, develop the skills, and get ready to transition to something else, right? Which I covered in my video about the upcoming collapse. And I gave the example of the king. Each person was given the position of king for a year, and they all partied except for one guy who built a kingdom on the other side of the river where they would be banished to afterwards. I talked about that in my other video, this sort of fable. And, the idea of building a life on the other side of death, where you're doing what is going to help your soul move forward and get closer to God, instead of indulging in, whatever it is here on planet Earth. And that's a metaphor for that, but also you can look at it in a post-apocalyptic collapse situation, that things are going to be changing, either, for you or your kids, and you can start preparing for that change. That's an example of something where you don't have to know everything, just have a general sense that we're in a collapsing situation, and the current whatever we're doing now is bad for us. The more time we spend on the internet, more time we spend indulging in whatever it is, some kind of video games, or just all the content or all the things that we're doing that are available to us, and engaging with the beast and doing what everyone else is doing, as opposed to going outside and planting food, which is, you'll feel the food will be better quality, and you'll feel better, physically, because you're outside and you're doing things that aren't, hurting your health and your spiritual well-being, creating more spiritual grossness. So like doing something positive that's, not just going on the internet for hours and pretending that you're on some kind of truther journey just by watching gobs and gobs of videos that, most of them are from people who are either disinformation agents or lost themselves. They're living, bad lives, and they're not doing anything with the information that they have other than talking, trolling, and arguing about it. And they're not changing their lifestyle at all, right? They have deviant lifestyles, and they're, indulging in the beast, but they're not, looking into changing their lifestyle, changing who they are as a person. The key to understand is a person evolving, is a person changing. Because there's people out there in the truth community who are making the same videos they made 10 years ago, like 15 years ago. Like they're saying the same Illuminati stuff or whatever it is. Looking at symbols and, whatever. And it's just the same stuff. A lot of people who have a Christian orientation have these same things, the cubies and flat earthers. I mean, it's the same arguments. It's the same thing, right? They haven't moved on. They're stuck. They're really into one issue. They're one issue truthers. They're whoever it is that dominates them and stuff with the pizza people, for example, and human trafficking, and that's all they think about or care about, and they don't realize that these are dead issues. Like there's no change going to happen. They're symptoms of a bigger problem in the beastly system, and they just are spinning and doing the same things, reacting and getting into truth or drama with other people and arguments, and they're not moving forward. They're not changing as a person, adapting. That's the whole idea of pockets of the future, where you start to live now the way people are. You figure out what is going to be available to people in the future, and you prepare for it as a group, as a, whatever it is. You create a pocket of the future. And, I've actually created several or started creating different ones already. Over the years, not intentionally, but just building homesteads and then, whatever. And so there is something you can do. And it might not work out. Like it might, you don't know what's going to happen. There's things that you can't control. The area in which you live, they might drop a bomb in a city near you and you're going to have to evacuate or do whatever, make your choices. And then you can't control that. But you can control your free time and what you do spiritually connected to God. I mean, doing the gratefulness meditation, I do these things that are like, there's things that you can do in terms of your spiritual well-being, move past your religious indoctrination and rise up to a higher level of spiritual, where you're connecting to God directly. And that can benefit you in a future existence, whether, that's the ultimate, good use of a person's time. Because connecting to God and getting back on track in these ego-driven existences that people have, and have a soul-driven existence, which is a title of a workbook I did years and years ago, where your soul is governing your existence. But forming a relationship with the divinity inside you and getting in touch with your soul and your soul's purpose and path is, the best thing that anybody can do. It's just, it has value beyond this life, right? It's the only thing that you can do that is going to take, you can take it with you when you die. It's something where if your soul evolves and you move forward on your spiritual journey and you get closer to God, then you can, take that and that's kind of continuation of future existences, and whether it's here or somewhere else, on this planet or in a etheric world. And it's the best investment of one's time, right? And I've been saying that over and over again. People don't want to listen. That's fine. That's that's your choice. Whatever one does, whatever you're doing, you should do an assessment of whether you feel like, do you feel bad all the time? You feel hopeless? You feel, negative and just being a part of these groups. And there's really cancerous people. I've talked about some of them, parasitic people out there in the truth community. And there's, of course, disinformation agents. And people are feeling bad all the time. They just, they come on the internet and they do, watch videos and they hear people talk about this. And they just feel bad all the time. There's no reason for you to feel bad about it. It's, accepting it. And then figuring out doing something that helps you feel positive. And that doesn't mean quitting your job and running off into the woods and doing something drastic, but realizing your particular situation, whatever it is, not listening to me or somebody else and doing what we're doing, but figuring out what you need to do personally. Connecting to God and praying about it and having some internal direction, a soul-driven direction and figuring out, why your purpose, what's your purpose here, what you need to do in, this life, and, what you can do in your free time to feel positive about doing something that you can still look at it and going, this is making me feel good. This is, something that is congruent with my soul, right? This is something that is fills me with a sense of well-being, right? Going for a walk or doing something physical, getting fresh air, and then you're, as opposed to just sitting on the internet for 8 hours, listening to negativity and trolling people and talk about how horrible Biden is or Trump or whatever it is. Arguing with strangers that you don't even know if they're like, who they are as a person or what they are, what they look like, what they are. They're just internet people with God knows what kind of profile picture or something. It could be a bot and it could be AI. You don't even know. And just getting into negative conflicts where you're, feeling angry and mad and hateful and these things. That's, the truth community has devolved into this kind of behavior. And, and it's a group think and an orientation, which is a negative one. The truth community, whatever hope there was for people in the truth community to do something or to affect the world positively, that ship has sailed collectively. It's, it's gone into it's like the snake eating its own tail type of situation. And because it had shills and people like Alex Jones, and then a lot of dumb people came in, upset Republicans who, binary thinkers, people with double-digit IQs, and, there's lots of reasoning for it. But, in terms of, like, there isn't a community. It's just a bunch of people who realize the official story is BS, and then they've taken a deviant path, an untrue path, just as untrue as the original story. And an untrue, a dysfunctional, unsustainable orientation to the world. And it's, people who are just, doing the same things that sheeple are doing, but looking down at sheeple and thinking they're so much better than sheeple, but they're just basically sheeple in a different, with a slightly different orientation. Anyways, let me segue this into the thing I had done with the Queen versus a spiritual person, and then at the end I have two voices overs I did for that. And then I want to do another voiceover on Christmas and Santa Claus and this, this thing I've talked about in the past, but kind of a new revelation about that. Greetings, brothers and sisters. I just finished my wife and I just watched the final season number 6 of the TV show The Crown, about the life and times of the royal family, specifically centering on Queen Elizabeth. I want to talk about royalty and leadership and the idea of a king and a queen in a moment, but just one thing I wanted to say is they really screwed Harry over. The actor they picked for Harry, and the way that they played his character was brutal. They went out and got him. It was the worst of the 6 seasons. My wife and I didn't really want to watch it. I certainly didn't want to watch it in the beginning. My wife she was more aware of Diana's death and believed the royal family was responsible for it. And the way they handled it in the 6th season, the guy who plays Prince Charles, now King Charles, he's even more annoying than the actual King Charles, if that's possible, the actor. It wasn't the best season of the show. The show was really well done. And despite, not agreeing with a lot of the story, the way they told it, there was some truther stuff in there, and they at least propaganda, where the royal family is being treated like they're some kind of exceptional people, right? The royal family wasn't happy with the show, to some extent. And in the, last episode, spoiler alert if you there's, the Queen is thinking about, it's centers around Charles' marriage to Camilla, and the Queen pondering whether she'll step down or not. And she's writing a speech with this idea that she's stepped down and let Charles be the king. And she has conversations with younger versions of herself who are played by these other actresses. And the one that played the majority of the role, the sort of younger, mid-30s kind of, the actress, she says that, this is an unnatural role, that you're really good at it, or they're really good at it. Kind of a weird kind of way to go about it, like a multi-personality thing. And the younger version of herself saying, this isn't fair, this isn't natural. It's not, it's kind of an abomination. She didn't use those words. So that's what the people were putting out there, even though that they were making this show that wasn't, an attack or hit piece on the royal family, but it is unnatural and it is is not a proper way to have a governmental system. And then at the end of the show, the guy, Prince Philip, I guess his name is, who was married to Queen Elizabeth, who in real life is like a class A ghoul, like he's just a real ghoul. And the actor they got to play him in his later years or even his younger years. This is what I'm talking about with Harry, where they chose an actor that didn't look like him. He looked like some kind of like a kid in a horror movie that does like poisons me or like does bad stuff, right? And they got better looking actors and actresses to play these other parts, and or you have fairly accurate. The woman who played Diana looked a lot like her, and was fairly accurate portrayal of her. Some of the expressions and her voice and all these things. But Prince Philip implies, they're planning their funerals. It's some years off. It's going to be 10 or whatever, 15 years away. They're planning their funerals, and he says, as soon as you're gone, this is going to fall apart. These people aren't the lot, as he calls them, of the other. The royal family isn't going to pull it off, right? You were born to do this, and they weren't. And so there's a couple things there. One, that it is unnatural and that it's coming to an end. That's what they were, the people who created the show were doing. So I guess there's to give him some credit. And there's a tune that they play on the bagpipes. I was joking with my wife that, because the bagpipe tunes are so distinguishable from the are so original and unique that you can tell them apart. But she requests a bagpipe guy to play her this haunting kind of song, Goodnight Dearie or something it was called. And it's kind of a powerful scene towards the middle of the ending of the show, and then they play it at the end of the show, and she's walking through Westminster Abbey, and they get a shot of her coffin, and it has her crown, and it has the scepter, and it has the orb that represents her. The scepter and the orb represents that she is God's representative on earth, which of course she's not, right? And the problem with the royal family and all royal families and this idea of kings and queens is that by genetics, you are born to rule. It's the most racist and wrong-headed thing that you could ever have, because no matter how great one person is in a genetic line, we all know from people who have siblings and have parents and grandparents and kids and all these things that you might have similarities, but just because one person in a family would make a good king doesn't mean the rest of them will. In fact, the chances of them producing another good king are relatively small, right? There's a lot of circumstances that go into creating a great personality and somebody who's good in one thing or another, right? You don't see that so much where you have a genetic line of excellence, right? Where one generation after another produces the same sorts of brilliance and, these types of things. And also, you have a different destiny. My kids have a destiny that's not my destiny, right? I would hope that they would do the, gratefulness, Sajmarg meditation. That was my, goal for them, because I think it's just the greatest thing. And it was my, I feel like it's a tragedy that they really aren't into it. It's their destiny. It's their soul's plan, whatever it is. And their freedom of choice and whatever their journey. And it's not up to me or anybody else to decide that for a person, even for a person themselves, right? We all have something that we have to do. I was thinking about this today, that when people name their kids the same thing, give their kids their name. Like George Foreman named like all 5 of his kids George, including his daughter. When a parent gives their kids their name and they're, Paul Romano II, right? And when you do that, like, it's arrogant and it's egotistical, and, it applies ownership of your kids in a way that's unhealthy, right? Like when Thomas Jefferson was R-ing his, one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, and she bore him 3 children who were his slaves, right? Who were his legal slaves. They weren't his children, they were his slaves. It implies that these kids are going to follow in your footsteps, and you're not choosing the name that they need to have. They're giving them your name, right? It's kind of lazy on top of it. But what it does is it really puts pressure on you to perform and be a great dad and be a great person. You don't see it with women, right? Women don't have their daughters are, Mary Smith II, right? You don't see that. It's a kind of an egotistical male thing. But you have to be great at something, in the world, and then you also have to be a great parent. Somebody that your kid wants to be like. If you're a crappy dad, you're a bad dad, and you're a failure and a loser, right? And you saddle your kid with that name, right? You're LeBron James II. Then you're putting that kid in a bad position. But if you're great, your kid doesn't have much of a chance at excelling or beating what you've done. And so that's the problem with these kings. And based in genetics, there's no genetics for leadership, right? Leadership isn't something that is passed down genetically. You have various, just in the order that you're born. Like it's different if you're an older person, if you're, the oldest child, the middle child, the youngest child, these things, right? Wherever you're born in the, just that alone affects whether you'll be a leader or not, and then the circumstances of your life and, whatever it is. And so there are things out in the world that are going to shape you into whatever you're supposed to become. And so this idea that this family would produce one good leader after another is, it's just impossible. And that's why they put out this fake Darwinian theory. The Charles Darwin theory is based in genetics in the royal family. It's also racist, right? It's saying that this group of people has genetics so that they have wealth and privilege and they're leaders, and they have subjects and people who are their slaves and have to bow down to them and treat them like they're something more than they are. It's the wrong way to go about governance and in some kind of a leadership type of situation. But to make it worse, people could say, well, they don't really have much power now, the royal family and these things, but they're actually much worse. Because it's not only that they're genetically born to lead and be rulers and to be kings and queens and these things, right? And the whole family is supposed to, carry out these, these ceremonies and all these things that they do. But these MNFers are also a head of a church. She's not only the Queen of England, but she's also the head of a church, and she's considered, by wielding this sphere and this scepter, that she, or now Charles, is considered God's representative on earth. And they're not. They're not even good rulers, but they're certainly not spiritual people. There's a moment where she's meeting with her bishops in this last episode and asking them if, it's okay for Charles to marry Camilla, who, they were both adulterers, cheating on their spouses and, all these things. And the whole scandal and Diana dying. And it's a real mess. And these bishops say to her that he needs to do some act of contrition publicly, and he does this, he says this, this kind of confession in front of it's pretty brutal. But not because this is about God and their, religious beliefs, because of the way people might take this if he marries this woman. It'll divide the church, and they might lose membership. And this is how churches have acted, religions have acted. They don't act on what God is and what the right thing is, and they act on what they can do to manipulate their followers and make sure they keep as many followers as possible. I have that opportunity here where I could pander to people, I could lie about myself or pretend I believe things and embrace Trump or pretend I was a Christian, or any number of things where I could expand my audience, or I can tell the truth, right? And, if you believe in what you're doing, whether it be, this, or, a religious person, or you believe in your religion, then you do what the religion or the divinity within you guides you to do. But none of these MNFers believe in their thing anymore. These religions and these royal families and all these people, they're all, it's political and manipulative, and they just cave, and, how politicians cave and pander to people, and, nobody believes in their beliefs anymore. They don't have faith in what their dogma is. So getting back to this idea that, she's God's representative on earth, or now King Charles is, just because of their genetic line, and they inherit this church and all this stuff, right? The Church of England. It's an effed up country. Like, it's, the whole thing, just effed up people. And all these, keeping this around when everyone knows it's bogus, or anybody who has critical thinking skills. There's people that, love the royal family, but they're, remedial people who are, beyond any sort of critical thinking and understanding of like how effed up it is that these things are being presented to them, that people have genetics to both lead, they're cousin effers, right? They're cousin bangers. They marry their cousins, and it's an inbred situation. They're all miserable and horrible people and petty, and they're not redeeming, and certainly not spiritual, and don't have a relationship with God. You could have one, they could crap out one along the line that would be really saintly and spiritual, but they're just, they're not. But in terms of who you are spiritually, it's based in service to God, right? It's based in how you serve God. And, not some bogus, I do charity, or some, kid, some girl or guy wants to, say how great they are in their yearbook, or they want to put it on a college resume, so they go do some volunteer work, and they, they mock the people they're serving. They volunteer at a soup kitchen or something, and they don't do it sincerely. They're doing it just to be performative and show people how great they are, or whatever. When they say the Queen serves, or, like Dianne Feinstein, she had, 50 years of service as a senator, but she walked away with $160 million worth of income, worth of wealth, when she was making like $300,000 a year, right? And she was getting paid off and corrupt. All these people claim to be servants, but they're really, taking advantage of the collective, right? They're taking advantage of, all of us, and exploiting the system on their behalf. What I'm talking about is real service, like service to God, where it's actual. And then you have your own spiritual journey. You go to higher and higher levels, and there's always going to be somebody who's the most advanced. There's going to be someone who is the highest developed person in the world spiritually. And in a sense, that's God's representative on earth. The person that's got this closest approach to God, who has gone the farthest on their spiritual journey. But it isn't like a prize or winning a gold medal. It isn't something that people can recognize or even see in you. And it isn't something to pat yourself on the back. But now you have to serve others. You reach a high level of spirituality, and now you have to be a conduit and pass it on to others. And in the Sajmark system of meditation that I do, there were 3 examples of this, right? For those of you who, haven't heard of it, and I've talked about it in the Journey series. And of course, the current guy is a complete dud, so I'll get into that in a moment. But, they all had kids, the masters of the system. A true master, the difference between a master and a king is somebody who masters themselves and becomes, and this is, I know people throw Jesus in there and all this kind of stuff, right? There's one son of God, he was born, all these things. But in reality, we all have to move forward spiritually. We all should be working towards being saints. And I'm kind of a slacker. I'm not, I'm just saying the way it should be. Like we all struggle with it. But the way it should be is we all should be working to be saints. We all should be working on our spiritual journey and becoming, a soul actualized person. We all have souls, and we all have, a ceiling, like a, I don't want to call it a ceiling, but we have the highest possible, best version of ourselves, where our ego is minimized, and we are, just we were as good as we could be on a spiritual level. And all of us should be working to be that way, and most of us aren't. And even a little bit. And it's not easy work because it's not glamorous. It's not, you don't get a material reward. Oftentimes you suffer materially to move forward spiritually. But we all could be working in that fashion, right? In the Sajmark tradition, there was a guy named Lalaji, the first master of the system, and he was able to penetrate to deeper levels of spirituality in a remote northern village. And people started to recognize it, and after a while, he had people come into his house, and he would transmit his energy, his spiritual energy to them in meditation, and they would come and get spiritual guidance from him. And it ended up being maybe 200 people or so over a 30-year period. I mean, just local people. And then he died. He passed away. And 13 years later, he had a successor named Ramchandra, same name as him, Babaji. This is the Sajmark tradition. And Babaji, during these 13 years went on like a deep spiritual adventure. And he was able to rise to high levels and kind of perfect the system of transmitting this energy to people. And he did incredible service to people on a spiritual level that, people were sort of aware of, but really not all that much aware of. But they just loved being around him because he exuded love and, just all these, he was, just the energy that came off of him and the work that he did and the way that he affected them, where when they were around him, they would be a better version of themselves, right? And eventually he, got older, and he had a person that he trained to be his representative, Master Charji, who was someone I knew. And he was a phenomenal person and spiritual leader, and he took this, organization and through service and travel and just, the spiritual work he did for people, and then building an organization, all these things. Wonderful. Just, I can't even put into words how great a person he was, right? And he was, like on another level when you got to spend time with him. But then he left this guy Dodgy, who is just like corrupt. But the worst part about it for me is he's incompetent. I just don't like incompetence. Like, I don't mind if you get a C. I don't mind if you're average. Like, just, I mean, I don't try to be excellent. I'm a slacker, right? I don't care. Like, I don't expect perfection. But in this case, you kind of have to be, it's a little bit different when you're a spiritual master. But he's just so bad. Like, he's got, he does some criminal stuff, and I don't even want to call it, I don't know what it is, right? But he's like a Don Knotts Putz version. It's hard to watch. And I've, covered this extensively in my Journey series video. And these guys all had kids, and they could have left the organization to their kids. There was buildings, by the time Charji was around. Charji had a son who was a successful businessman. Somebody I know, a good guy, like someone he's a little bit, he's got his issues, but he was certainly a spiritual person. And Charji could have left in fact, he got accused that he was going to leave his, the mission to his son. Of course, that was never, he was very depressed when somebody accused him of that, like a senior person in the thing, right? Because it just doesn't work that way. You can't leave it to your kid. You have to find the best suitable person to carry on the work. And in this case, they could transmit their energy into their successor. And it worked for 3 people. And then we had the 4th guy, right? It's been hard for me to watch, and, I'm light about it now. But, this is the problem with human beings, right? Because the system that was in place where the energy, the essence of the previous master could be transmitted into his successor, which might sound strange to you guys, but I've been aware of this practice for, many years. When Babaji was traveling with this guy Charji, Babaji was a small guy, very humble. He was a babu, a clerk, and Charji was a big businessman, 6'4". He was somebody who spoke many languages. He was a worldly person. He was very competent, and he was good at organizational things, and he was just good with people and reading situations, right? He had different qualities, but Babaji was training him spiritually. Babaji was a spiritual master. And they were in an airport in Copenhagen, and Babaji said, sit for meditation, and he transmitted to Charji for 1 minute and 40 seconds, which is a short sitting for those people who do the meditation, right? And he said at the end of it, he said, "Yeah, I just transmitted my spiritual essence to you. You're now my successor," which is a great way to do it, right? Like his, all the things that he had accomplished, all the his spiritual knowledge, all the things that he had, and he got transmitted to him through the previous master, right? And this was a great way to keep the energy going, right? But then we have this stud, like we have this real, this putz who also had the energy put into him, but he just couldn't do anything with it. It's sad. Like I was around him when he was becoming the master system, and I could see that he was changing and he was being given these spiritual gifts and things, and he had the energy and he just failed, which is just sad. But it's a lot better than the royal family. But the problem remains the same, and that's that human beings are just always go to the lowest common denominator, and that's a sad fact in all of these things. That's why no system works, whether it's communism or capitalism or the royal family or true spirituality or it's whatever it is. You have one great leader, you have one brilliant person, you have whatever it might be, a group of people that come together, like the founding fathers, for example. Of course, they were all Freemasons and they had their issues and they were slave owners, but they were good at whatever they did. And they put together kind of an idealistic government here, and we see how it's all turned out with Jojo Magoo pooping in his Depends and Donald Trump, and all these clowns. They're certainly not great men, right? And so, this idea of being a master, mastering oneself, and not, a master in the sense that you call yourself a master, because that's never the case. You can't call yourself a king. You can't aspire to be a king. You can't aspire to be royal. You can't aspire to be a master. You can't, call yourself a saint or, spiritual person, but you can become one, right? And it's not a title that you have. It's not something that, it's a certificate or something you get. It's something that you become, and it's the greatest thing. And I'm not talking about in terms of, having personal knowledge of it, but understanding the excellence in this field of spirituality, where you become the best version of yourself. It's just the greatest thing. And if everybody just tried a little bit to do that, then we would see the world transform. But unfortunately, that probably won't happen. I just want to add to the voiceover I did yesterday. My voice started to go. It was late at night. So the difference between these two systems of picking a leader, the original way that they did in Sajmarg and, of course, the royal family, is that the way they did the original three masters of the system was based in merit. It was based in them being the best possible person to take over leadership role. And that is the only way to do it. You have to get the best possible people. Now, in a democracy, it seems like that could happen, right? But corruption sets in, and the way that the system works, the governmental system, the political system, you need gobs and gobs of money, and you need the blessing of a controlled media, right? And that, if the media takes you down, which anybody who was a good candidate or was going to fix the system would be taken down, or whatever it is. But even a bigger problem is the people picking the president or the candidates are the people themselves, and the people suck, right? That the people aren't a good barometer or judge of character, and they can be easily lied to, manipulated. And so they aren't going to get the best. People aren't going to pick the best, right? People aren't going to pick the best, even going back to, like, say, high school, the prom king and the prom queen, like whatever it might be. Isn't the best people, the best leaders, the best, the best of the best, the still saintly people that are going to get picked for something like that, whatever it is. So, even on a local election with mayors and, people like, and local politicians, it's not the best people that get picked. The masses, the people that make up the populace, aren't the best barometers of who is a good person and what they, a judge of character, and being able to pick somebody who's the pinnacle of human, the best human being that's there, right, for the job of whatever leadership position it is. So, there has to be a better way, right? There has to be some sort of, way that you can find good leaders where the cream rises to the top. And in the Sajmark system, that was there because the previous master of the system would pick the best possible candidate. And that happened with Lalaji, Babaji, and Charji. But this fourth guy, Charji, first picked another guy who quit, who didn't want to do it. And it was questionable. Like, I didn't think he was the best guy based on my experience with him. And then, he was running out of time. There's only 3 years left before he would pass away. And he, seemed to be manipulated into taking Kamlesh, Daji, the current master of the system. And so, I don't know what happened there. And maybe he was the best possible person. He was a good practitioner of the system. At least he was at one point. So I don't know. Like, I don't know what happened there. And, I felt like it was a good system because the person who was the best judge of character, someone who was on a higher level and was in touch with the divinity within him, someone connected with the divine aspect of his own existence. And he was just good at reading the person's character and person's, who they were. I mean, Charji was excellent at this. And so I don't know what happened there. Like, it lasted 3. Like, it's just, I mean, I don't know whether it's human beings are doomed to poor leadership, whatever it might be, at least at this time. Like, how many bad bosses have you had? Or, people who just, I mean, not just in terms of mistreatment of other people, which is obviously the big thing, but in terms of making competent decisions and all these other things. But ultimately, it comes down to the quality of the people. People create the leader. A leader is a reflection of the people and the leader that the people deserve. And when you have people who are, exploitable and their own, they're caught in their own drama of their own corruption, their own desire-based corruption, their own lack of integrity and moral fiber and things like this, you're going to get bad leaders. And, I guess in that sense, the royal family and these, it doesn't matter who you get because the leaders always end up being kind of the same because all the people suck and they want people to tell them what they want to hear and they don't want real true leadership. People aren't seeking truth, so they're going to, if you're not seeking truth, then you're going to get liars, right? I mean, that's, if you're not willing to get somebody who's going to tell you the truth, you're not going to get someone who's going to tell you things you don't want to hear or take the country or the world in a direction that it needs to go, then you're going to get, somebody that's going to lie to you. You're going to get manipulators and people who are, in themselves wanting to do the wrong thing. When everyone wants the wrong thing to happen, then you're going to get people who are going to provide that for you, collectively and individually. And that's what we have now. People don't want to do what it would take to make this into a good system worldwide or countrywide. People want their, whatever it is, privileges, and they want their things that are, not available in a divine-based system. And they don't want the divine, repercussions for their actions, and they don't want, to suffer the consequences of doing the wrong thing. And so you're going to get leaders in whether it be corporations or, people are rising up all the time in power who will provide for you the wrong stuff, provide for you the bad decisions and the bad, policies so that you can continuously live in some sort of, an illusion, right? I mean, I see this all the time on my YouTube channel. People don't want to hear the truth that is the truth they most need to hear, right? And when you tell it to them, they're going to leave or get upset or whatever. And, people can't handle the truth in that sense, in the larger sense. Anyways, I'm going to wrap this. It's Christmas Day today. I'm going to wrap this one up here. And I don't know when I'm going to put this video out. I guess tomorrow. If I have any more thoughts, I'll include them. Whatever. Okay, so I want to talk about Santa Claus and Christmas and, the argument against when people say that conspiracies don't exist And it's too hard to pull off a mass secret governmental or global operation, then Santa Claus is the epitome of proof that that is not true, right? So, also, of course, the atomic bomb, which over 500,000 people knew about it in America in some capacity or another, and they were able to keep it secret. So that's another example. But Santa Claus is even a bigger example. And people will say, well, that's harmless. That there is this lie, this mass deception, because that's what it is. It's a mass deception where parents lie to their children. And we're all supposed to collectively go along with it. Like even parents who are atheists and parents who don't believe in it and tell their kids the truth, then those kids go into school and say there's no Santa. And it becomes a big issue, right? It's become, controversy in neighborhoods and school departments, lawsuits, all these things. When people who don't believe or don't participate in the Satan/Santa illusion, and the psychological operation, where we lie to our kids, we lie to our children collectively, and then one day the kids realize that they've been lied to, and it's a whole thing, right? And there's, I got some, there's some videos I've done before, and I'll put those videos in. Also to do with the Santa tracker, to do with this. And people say, well, it's a harmless lie. It's not something, nefarious, and it's not something that's has damaging effects, right? Kids like the idea of Santa Claus, and there's all these movies and TV shows, and it makes Christmas better, and that it's harmless. It's a harmless mass lie. But it's far from harmless, right? And it's far from, when you have NORAD, I'll put the Santa tracker thing first, and when you have NORAD have Santa Claus going around the globe, and they devoted their time, the North American, whatever it is, the Defense Department thing, radar tracking, and they're tracking an imaginary Santa. The government's participating in this lie, right? The government's lying to its children. And you say, well, what's the harm? Santa gives gifts, parents gives gifts. But there's lots of harm to it. And, kids grow up with this idea that everybody will collectively lie to them, and it's okay to collectively lie to your kids. And that's the dishonesty about that. But there's more things that are wrong with it. And I alluded to these in my earlier video, but I want to, talk about it more specifically in this area, the damage that's done. So first of all, Jesus was a relatively poor person in terms of his material wealth. He wasn't somebody who, whatever his, his situation in life was, he wasn't a materially based person. And the Christian tradition has become about materialism. And Christians, lots of them associate success materially with being blessed by Christ. And there's an association with war in Christ, right? There's these Christians, I forget the name of their, there's a whole group of them. They're like called the Brotherhood or something like that. And, don't tell me, don't care, don't need to know, but you can look them up. And they were influential in the Iraq War. And they have like posters of Jesus with a sword and Jesus with, ripped muscles and, Jesus as a warrior. And there's all kinds of ways that you can warp Jesus's life and disrespect his teachings as a religion, as a Christian person, and make them into something that you think you would like Jesus to be, right? But it disrespects and it undermines his work as a spiritual being. And so much so that his birthday, which is lost, and I've talked about this so much in even a recent video, so I'm not going to talk about it here, but it's not on December 25th. That's a day they used to bring in the pagans in Europe who were celebrating the solstice. So that's often, of course, we have all these European things. We have this guy, Saint Nick. Santa has an origin story. And whatever he was considered a saint, right? He was born in Turkey. He was orphaned as a kid, but his parents were really wealthy. He was really, really wealthy in that area. And there was no snow. There was no North Pole. There's no chimneys, but he would secretly give people gifts who needed it, poor people, because he became sort of a Christian, spiritual person. There's a story where there was these girls who couldn't get married, so he dropped some money in their window and it landed one of the girls' stockings. So that's again, don't know if that's true or not, but when he died, apparently his date of death, his death day was December 6th, and people would give gifts in his honor. So somebody who was a kind of a well-known saint in a small area. And, I don't know if he was an actual spiritual saint, right? But what his life was different than the story, what's become Santa Claus living in the North Pole with a bunch of elves, making toys and giving, sneaking into people's houses and giving them all these things, right? And if he did secretly drop money into this family's house and into this girl's stocking, they knew who it was because he's attributed that act. And so if he's doing these secret, giving gifts, kind of a weird thing to do. But that's the origin story. And certainly nothing on the level of Jesus. He wasn't a saint on a spiritual level, didn't have deeper spiritual teachings. It was material based, right? A rich man who became spiritual and decided to give some of his wealth. Nothing wrong with that. Nice step in the spiritual direction. Nice little thing, right? No big deal. It's not a bad thing at all. But, it's still not spiritual. It's a material thing, right? It's a materialistic thing. It's being generous. It's being these things, but it's not something that connects you to God, which happens internally and is beyond the material existence. But what's happened is they have taken away Jesus' actual life and the celebration of his birth and these things and turned it into a Santa Claus. And again, he wasn't, Santa Claus is they brought in other things like a festival of lights and these things that come from, Northern Europe, these cutting down trees. There's all these different traditions from different places that have hijacked Jesus' birthday for Christians. And, for Christians who are struggling, like the Bible is, like I've said, it's not great. It's been edited, and, this is evidence of it being edited where they've put in a saint from Turkey, but made him from, he lives somehow in, he's going to look differently than the white European guy who lives in the North Pole. They've warped the story and changed the story, and they use it to hijack Jesus's, birthday, and they're not celebrating Jesus's actual birthday, and how much it's been watered down, how much has been lost, and the spiritual essence being lost, and using that as a day to connect internally to God would transform the world. Instead, it's a materialistic day where materialism and the whole economy predicated, the European economy and American economy, the economy of Christian people, and world economy to that, to a large extent, because there are countries that are producing goods and services that are, that are being targeted as America and Europe. It is what saves our economy. It's the only time of year that a lot of these retail stores are in the black, and, our whole economy is predicated on having a big Christmas. Christmas is a huge economic boon, and the materialism that surrounds it, and the idea of all these, the weird elf on the shelf thing and all these weird things that go with it now. They're always adding these things. And then the depression that sets in for people who are lonely during Christmas. It's, stands out that they don't have things, and, people who can't afford things, or people who get too much. And, it's just an influx. If you have all these parents and grandparents and relatives giving your kids things and you get your kids things, and, the kids are overwhelmed often by the materialism of having all these new things on that day. It can be overwhelming, and, has a negative effect, and, they don't feel good. It can be depressing, and, it has all these negative connotations because it's not true. It's not a real thing. It's not a good thing. This kind of materialism isn't a good thing, right? So it's not some simple little lie. It's like $1 trillion business, right? It's, it's an astronomical, business that every corporation, every manufacturer, everybody wants to get a piece of that Christmas business. And then this idea of a red suit and the guy's creeping into your house, and, his name being an anagram for Satan. You move 2 letters, or you just move the N from, you put the end at the end of the name, and it becomes Satan, right? And so there's all these weird things about it. And it certainly is something that's ego-driven and satanic in that way. Anything to do with the ego running amok and disconnecting from the soul becomes demonic or satanic, or whatever you want to call it. When your ego hijacks your soul's plan and your life, and, this is an ego-driven holiday. So it's not some innocent little lie. It's something that's being perpetrated, on children, and then, there's a deception there And then there's all these other implications, and it's taking them away from the real thing, the real celebration of Christ's life, and the idea of the kingdom of heaven lies within, and these things is some of his better teachings and some of the good things that he had to offer. It's a dominant force in our lives, right? It affects all of us in one way or another. And so it isn't just something that's small, but also it's something that perpetuates this whole materialistic, hedonistic society that we have. I mean, it's the centerpiece of that, right? Of indulgence and celebration, and then there's New Year's Eve, which is, getting drunk or wasted or whatever it is, and these types of things. The indulgence and the materialism, and a lack of real things, lack of real sincere things, genuine things, authentic things in one's life, right? It takes you away from, it's an illusion. It's they're selling an idea, some sort of romantic comedy and things, and, the way that they sell things in a way that you can never have them, right? The things that don't exist. Happily ever after and all these things, right? All these ideas of some sort of utopian society that is perpetrated in movies and TV shows that certainly doesn't exist now and will never exist in the future, right? The good guy always wins, the hero always wins. These ideas that are put out in all these films and things that are not congruent with real life, and the ups and downs, and how oftentimes the trials and even you can see this in movies sometimes. They don't accentuate it, but it's sometimes the obstacles and trials that you go through, those are the real triumphs. And that's, something to, aspire to work through the difficulties you're inevitably going to have. And that, partying and doing these things isn't going to make you happy, right? We've seen it. The richer people are always miserable. The wealthiest people who have, all the money in the world, and they're miserable, horrible people that are self-centered and mentally ill and these things. And so it's a part of the big overall lie that, I cover here so much, that being wealthy and famous and being materialistically successful brings you happiness, and that's your goal. It doesn't bring you happiness, and it isn't your true goal. You have a purpose here, and it isn't materialism, right? It isn't to indulge. We have a soul's purpose. Our soul has created our life for a reason. And this, Santa lie, amongst all these other things in our economy and an ego-driven existence, an indulgence, entitlement, materialism-driven existence is leading people down the wrong path, right? But anyways, I'll just wrap this one up here. There are three things that went together, these ideas that I've placed here. They're all connected, at least in the way I see it. These three different voiceovers, the group think that people get into, and the group delusionment that they get into, and the way that people perceive of things, and you can see these things falling apart now with all the belief wars and how it affects people around holiday season, and people can't talk about things anymore because it erupts into fights and evil. Apparently Trump just gave a Christmas message, and it's I'm going to cover this separately. But he says, he's got all this stuff about his enemies, and he says, are looking to destroy our once great USA. May they rot in hell again. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas to all, including crooked Joe Biden and Jack Smith, and he gets into it. And I'll cover this in my next video here, how that's wrong or whatever it is. But that's the way people are feeling. Like, there's bad people and good people. There's good and evil. It's a war between good and evil, and my group is good and your group is evil, and these things. And that's, being expressed in these various elements. So there's that, part of it. And then I got into the Queen and the idea of, spiritual master, and one being, a genetic line, and one being something where you're a saint, like, getting into this thing with Santa Claus, to tie that into that. Whatever you do as a saint, as a spiritual person, there's the essence of what you do, whether you're Jesus, whether you're St. Nicholas, any of these people become spiritual people, to whatever extent you become a spiritual person in your life. And then if there's a movement that happens, they're going to warp your teachings, warp your essence of your existence, and, bend it into some materialistic, satanic kind of demonic thing where they can control other people and disconnect them from God, thus subverting the true essence of what you're doing, right? Which is, we see that happening now. here and, everywhere with all these movements, these religious movements. And I've discussed this, in many videos. So these things all tie together in that way. Only spirituality will save this world. It's paramount. I'll definitely point for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.